Before the summons, the manse at the edge of Pentos held the day's heat like a secret. The shutters were all open to the garden, and the garden had surrendered its scent. Bruised oranges, dusty lavender, the late sweetness of figs. Thin curtains trembled whenever the sea breeze remembered them, and in their steady, tender trembling Daenerys could imagine the house itself breathing. There were afternoons in Pentos when she learned to move as silently as the light. She had learned it because Viserys hated sound unless it came from his own mouth, and because Illyrio's servants preferred to pretend the guests took up no space at all. She made offerings in that silence. Careful hands, smallness, obedience. She did not know whether anyone accepted them. She did not know if there were gods in Pentos who cared for any of this, or if the gods of the western cities cared at all for a girl shelved among carpets and jars and coral lamps until she was needed. She spent an hour with her cheek against a cool marble column and counted her breaths in the old way her mother taught her when the palpitations came. She counted the curve of the column's veins, green in the white, as if the stone remembered a different time when it had been a thing that grew. She watched the courtyard fountain, where the water had been trained to leap precisely to the height of Illyrio's own shoulder. He had shown her that trick, chuckling, "My dear child, you see the art?" and then sent a boy to stand under the falling water so she might observe the glitter on the boy's hair. Doves came to the fountain and stepped on the cool marble rim as if their feet were coins. She tried to feel that way. A thing passed from purse to purse again. A thing that shone when wet. The heat made her skin shine too, and the silk at her sleeves stuck to her arms, and on the back of her neck a drop of sweat gathered and would not fall. The feeling of it became a thought that approached dread. She shook her head to dislodge it. She told herself softly that this was ordinary life, that she was still Daenerys, sister of Viserys, no matter the heat or the house, and the word ordinary struck her like a slap. What had ever been ordinary? Footsteps in the outer hall came first like a rumor and then like a fact. They were not Illyrio's soft shoe drag, and not the smooth shuffle of his servants. These were measured and uneager, and she sat up straight as a bead of sweat finally broke free and slid to the hollow of her throat. The first person to appear in the archway was not a man at all, but a woman so tall it briefly seemed to Daenerys that the room had been made too small. She wore no jewels. Her hair was as white as new ash and braided high, coiled into a crown that left the thin sharpness of her face visible as if it were a blade. She had a scar that began beneath one ear and ended beneath the other, a pale arc across her throat's column, a reminder of something that had almost taken her voice. Behind her came two men and a boy. All three wore garments Daenerys did not recognize. A sleeveless black that was not quite leather, stitched with something that caught light like fish scale but did not move like scale at all. They were foreigners, but to Daenerys everyone had been a foreigner for so long that the word had ceased to mean anything. She rose without speaking. The tall woman inclined her head to her, and the movement exposed a small pale notch at her throat where the scar thinned. She spoke in Valyrian, but not in the soft, street-grazed Valyrian of the chicken sellers and the perfumers and the men who pinched her cheek and told her she would be beautiful if she smiled. Her Valyrian was something older, the nose carriage of certain vowels and the knife-quick drop of consonants that made Daenerys's mouth want to shape itself into a new, more careful thing. "I am Serena of House Urias," the woman said. "I bear summons." The boy who stood a pace behind her held a scroll case of black glass. When he opened it, it made no sound. The glass was not glass as Daenerys had known it. It had no bubbles, no color at all, as if it had been poured from a darkness without fire. From the case, the boy drew a cylinder of vellum, white as the woman's hair, and tied with a thin ribbon of some metal that glowed faintly even in the shade. The boy stepped forward. He had a scar too, but his was small, a crescent near his eye that looked like someone had once pressed a thumbnail into his skin and never apologized. He held the scroll with two hands the way a priest might hold something holy. For half a beat Daenerys thought to turn and look for Illyrio or for Viserys, to not be the first pair of hands to touch what had been brought. But the woman's eyes were blade-sharp and fixed on her, and the boy waited, and the doves at the fountain cooed once and were still. She took the scroll. The ribbon was not silver and not steel. It was something in between, with a memory of heat in it. When she lifted the tie, it moved as if eager. She felt foolish thinking that, but she felt it. She unrolled the vellum. The script inside was like a city, arched, terraced, full of columns and light and shadows. The letters were the Valyrian she knew and were not. Some strokes were like the bones of her mother's stories. Others were vines of a language she had never been permitted to climb. It took a moment to understand that she was being addressed. Daenerys of House Targaryen, born of Riella, blood of Enar, the vellum began, and then took a breath that lasted half the scroll. The breath named things she had been told and named things no one in Pentos could have known. It named a small brown mole behind her left shoulder that she had never shown to anyone. It named a lullaby fragment her mother had hummed on a cold night on Dragonstone. 3 notes Daenerys had sometimes repeated to herself without knowing why. It named dragon names that had been given to long-dead beasts and names they had never been given because they died in egg. Her hands shook. The letters did not. "You are summoned," the script said. "You are summoned by the Senate of the Freehold, by the Conclave of the Flames, by the Archon of Orys, by the Keeper of the Candles, by the Choir of Losses, by those who remember and those who do not yet remember. You are called to the peninsula. You are called home." The words below that were not ceremonial. They were precise. "A ship waits. Provisions have been made. You will be escorted. You will accept the protection of the horns and of the law. What belongs to you by blood will be tested. What belongs to you by fire will be asked. What belongs to you as heir will be revealed." When she lifted her eyes, the woman was still watching her. The boy had not exhaled. The men wore the same unreadable not-quite leather as if it grew on them. Viserys came then. Of course he did. Viserys never let silence stay for long in rooms where there was a chance someone was about to choose something. He came with his hair unbound and his face flushed from sleep or from a cup. He took in the scene and made of it a thing to be angry at. His gaze snagged on the scroll in her hands and then on the woman and then on her hands again. "What is this?" he said, not asking. Serena did not bow to him. She watched him as one might watch a fire in a place where fire should not be, with attention but without any intention of touching it. "Summons," she said evenly, and her Valyrian had that same old cadence, the same stern music. He barked a laugh. "Summons? From whom?" "Another fat magister with too many rings. Another scented swan boat with more captains than crew." "From the Freehold," said Serena, and for the first time the sound of her voice held something that brushed reverence without ever committing to it. "From Valyria." The words landed in the room like a dragon landing in an orchard. All the doves startled into cloud. Daenerys had known when the woman spoke that the scroll was not from any of the cities she had known. She had suspected, because of the black glass and the scar and the way the letters spoke to her mole and her mother's lullaby. Even so, to hear the name said aloud made the house tilt. Viserys' laugh became a thin wire. "From Valyria," he repeated. "From a ruin and a smoking sea." "Not a ruin," said Serena. "A secrecy. Not a smoking sea. A remembrance." "I have seen maps," said Viserys. "The peninsula is a blot. The ships that went there did not come back. The catspaws of your so-called freehold have never shown their faces in the free cities. The Doom. The word you use belongs to people who were not invited," Serena said. "The 14 flames shed rock and smoke as they always have. The peninsula has always eaten those who sail without law." Viserys' mouth worked. He looked at Daenerys. He had never liked to look at her for long. She was a mirror he did not care to brave. Now he looked and stared and saw the scroll again, the ribbon like a strip of cooled lightning over her palm. He lifted his chin a fraction. "And if it is from Valyria, that old nest of snakes, what then? What do they want with my sister? They can kiss my... They want what was sworn to the blood," said Serena, and the room cooled when she said it, or seemed to. The men behind her stood straighter, which meant they had been waiting for the word. The boy cocked his head as if music had started. Illyrio arrived at last in his soft shoes and soft voice and soft belly and did what he always did. He made the air seem thicker just by smiling. He pressed his hands together as if he were about to straight line a deal and did not want anyone to get hurt by the alignment. He kissed the air near Serena's cheek and near Daenerys' hand and near Viserys' air. "What a joy," he said. "What a marvel to see one of Horus in my poor house. Serena Urias, your reputation precedes you. The horn line, the scar, forgive me, I mean to honor, not to pry." "The scar is not a secret," said Serena calmly. "It was an oath. I was a child. They carved it as they carved the lily into the skin of the singers that go to the mines." Illyrio's eyes were small and wet and eager. "The mines," he said. "Mines and flames. Flames and dragons. But forgive me, I chatter like an old woman. You bring us a letter. You bring us an invitation, perhaps." "A summons," said Serena, looking still at Daenerys. Illyrio's eyes shifted, and for a breath Daenerys saw the rest of it beneath the small talk. The high wall and the stairs inside the wall and the careful steps he took on them. "Summons," he echoed, soft as cloth. "Ah, well, one does not turn such a thing away unheard. Come, come, sit in the cool, not here where even the stone sweats. I have chilled wine. I have cherries with saffron. I have a tongue that will not stop flattering your courage." No one sat. Serena did not drink. Viserys did, grabbing a cup from a servant's tray and spilling half of it and drinking the rest until he coughed. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand like a boy who had never been allowed a napkin. Then he found his flourish. "If Valyria wishes audience," he said, "let them speak to me. I am the king. She is my sister. She goes where I say." Serena let the silence accumulate. She did not look at Viserys when she spoke. "The scroll was written to Daenerys," she said. "She will have to answer." Illyrio smiled as if the absence of argument were his own grace. "If our Princess Daenerys would read aloud," he said, "we shall all be wiser." She read. She stumbled with some of the old forms and was mortified to stumble in front of this woman whose hair had been bound with ash. But Serena did not wince or look away. The boy did not blink. The letter's precise instructions and its invocation of her birth and her mole and her mother's 3 notes made Viserys lash the air with his hand as if he could whip the words into a different shape. "Tricks," he said hoarsely. "Tricks of glass and lies." "The glass speaks when the candles burn," said Serena, and something moved behind the statement like weather. "It speaks across long water and thick earth. It knows the songs of those it has listened to, and it has listened long. The keeper of the candles remembers everything that has ever been whispered near one. Some of what she remembers belongs to you." Daenerys touched the edge of the scroll with fingertips that had gone cold. The vellum was warm, as if it had been lying in sun. "You will be escorted," she read quietly. "You will accept the protection of the horns and of the law." "The horns?" Illyrio asked, delighted by new nouns. "The law," Viserys said, spitting the word like a fishbone he had discovered too late. Serena slipped her hand inside her garment and drew out what Daenerys had taken for a thread of shadow. It was a thong of leather, old and oiled, and from it hung a pendant the color of smoke. No, not color, texture. The thing was an animal horn cut down and polished until it had forgotten it had ever been horn. Its surface held light and did not reflect it, as if it drank. Around the rim, Daenerys saw characters incised so small they seemed like pollen. She did not know them. She wanted to trace one with a thumbnail and felt herself draw back as if her nail were an unclean thing. "The horns," Serena said, "mark those who are under the protection of the freehold while they travel at its request. Without a horn, the roads may eat you. With a horn, they may hesitate. The law is old and has teeth." She glanced at Daenerys' hand, at the place where the scroll's ribbon had touched her skin. "The law will recognize you." Viserys laughed, but no longer with any rhythm. "You put a string around my sister's neck and tell me to be grateful. That is your law. Our law is that promises made to blood must be kept by blood," Serena said. "Your house is blood of ours." "Our house," Viserys said quickly, "and I am its head. If oaths were sworn, they were sworn to kings." Daenerys felt the heat press between her eyes. The scroll's script blurred, then sharpened again. She glanced at Illyrio and found what she expected. his expression carefully shaped to be neither solicitous nor skeptical, as if the shape of a thought could be a commodity too. She glanced back at Serena and met the woman's stare and was startled by the unadorned fact of it. No petition, no pretty coaxing. Serena Urias was not used to arranging her words around the needs of men like Illyrio or boys like Viserys. What belongs to me? Daenerys heard herself ask. By blood. What is that? The right to stand where you began, Serena said simply. I began, Viserys cut in a palace that was stolen from me. My sister will come to no peninsula of superstitious miners to be told to kneel to a senate like a shopgirl before a counter. Serena's gaze moved to him at last like a blade's attention. The freehold does not take knees, she said. We ask for breath and for memory and for the two to be held together. She did not change tone when she added, if a king has been wronged, he may come and ask for the law's teeth. If a sister has been summoned, she may come and ask for her name. Illyrio clapped his plump hands softly once. How handsome, he murmured. How entirely handsome. We are all very stirred. But speak plainly, Serena Urias, for my guests are tired of being stirred and never being served. Why now? Why any of it? Why this child, sweet as she is? What do your archons and choirs want? Fire? Serena said, and the word hung in the air as if it had been nailed there with invisible nails. And a hand that belongs to it. It was madness. It was religion. It was the sort of sentence men like Illyrio mocked in private while buying and selling it by the armful. It was something else too. Daenerys felt the edges of herself lift. Not vanishing, not being erased, but being made lighter. For a moment she imagined herself as a piece of paper held above a brazier. The smoke would curl around her edges. She would bend toward it. She did not know if she would burn. She did not answer then. More talk was needed. Talk was always needed. Illyrio led them through rooms Daenerys had never entered, as if the invitation to the other woman had been an invitation to reveal his own house. Serena never once allowed herself to be placed in a seat lower than any of Illyrio's high-backed chairs, which meant she stood more than she sat. She ate 2 cherries and declined the saffron. Viserys paced and flung his hands and spoke of armies as of horses he had already harnessed. He said Drogo's name twice, trying to bring a weight into a room that no longer obeyed him. The boy with the black glass case watched the fountain as if he had never seen one. The 2 silent men walked the edges of carpets, always near the shade. When evening came, Daenerys sat in her small room and held her mother's brooch. The brooch was cheap. It had always been cheap. It had nothing to do with dragons except that it had survived in a pocket when so many other things had not, and that had been enough for Viserys to claim it as proof. He had claimed so many proofs. She listened to the house and then to the sea beyond the house and then to the things her mind wanted to say that had nothing to do with either. If you go, said one of those thoughts, you will go to a place that has only existed as a rumor your whole life. If you go, you will be putting your foot on a floor that your blood once polished. If you go, you will leave your brother one more reason to hate you, and he does not need reasons. If you stay, said the next, you will be sold like salt is sold, weighed against horses in honor, and told you have done something fine. In the middle of the night, when the house thought it could relax, a light woke in the corner of the room. It woke without a source, and it was a candle that had not been there. A narrow, black stone thing, lit without flame, glowing like a coal in breath. The light was not light as she had known it either. It did not lay itself on the bed in oval patches. It did not push shadows into corners. It appeared only where her eyes rested, as if her gaze brought it into being and withdrew it at will. She should have screamed. She should have rung for a servant who would come and pretend not to see. She sat very still and listened to her heart count itself. In the candle's glow a face coalesced, not Serena's and not Illyrio's and not any of the faces that had laughed for her or at her. It was a woman's face, older than Serena's, with a mouth that would never waste words. Dark hair, eyes like iron. Noiskar. The mouth moved, and the sound was not in the room but in her skull. You have been called, the voice said in Valyrian, a dialect of this woman's own, a dialect that Daenerys's mouth would never learn. You have been called before and did not hear. You hear now because the world is hungry and we are tired of feeding it. Bring what you have. Bring what was given to you. Bring what was taken away. I have nothing, she whispered, and her whisper was grotesque in the quiet, heavy and clumsy. The candle glow gathered around her like a patient hand. The mouth did not smile. It said, "You will walk where your grandmothers walked, and you will be shown what they wanted and did not confess. You will be asked to say a name aloud that no one has spoken in 300 years. You will decide if the island takes it back." "I am a child," she said. "I am my brother's sister. I have known rooms and hallways. I have known a fish stew that tastes of old wood. You are a mouth," the voice said, softer. "You are a hand. You are a place where a thing can happen. That is all any of us are." When the light went out, Daenerys had been holding her breath. She let it go and went down to the garden and put her hands into the fountain. The water was cold and became warmer where her hands were, the small local tempering. She thought of horns and law and a peninsula that ate ships and did not apologize. She thought of a scar cut into a child's throat because someone told her that was the shape of her promise. She went back upstairs and slept with the scroll under her pillow, the way she had once slept with a seashell she wanted to keep. In the morning she was still Daenerys, and Pentos was still Pentos, and Illyrio was still a man whose bracelets jingled with other men's secrets. Viserys was a storm that had not yet exhausted itself. Serena stood in the doorway like a thing carved from a harder stone than the house had been built from. "You will come," she said, not wasting anyone's time with asking. "Yes," Daenerys said, and for an instant she saw from the inside what it was to be Viserys. How clean the world could feel when a decision was not a wolf circling but a path placed under your feet. "Yes," Viserys said no. He said it in all the languages he possessed, and in several he did not. He said it to Illyrio, who smiled. He said it to Serena, who let the word break against her like a wave against glass. He said it to Daenerys alone in her room, and some of how he said it was a boy's fear and some of it was the cornered, hungry animal he had become. She did not change her answer. Illyrio made the arrangements so quickly that Daenerys understood they had been half-made already, that something in this rich, whispering man had expected and prepared and purchased. They brought in a woman with hands like a surgeon's who measured Daenerys for a traveling garment, something that did not mind being sweated in. They brought in a trunk for Daenerys that was lighter than it should have been because it was meant to be carried by one person who did not expect help. The boy with the black glass case slept in the hall outside Serena's room and woke before anyone else did. He watched Daenerys walk past him with eyes that did not blink. They went to the harbor at dawn. Pentos's harbor was a place of familiar chaos, the hawking of men who sold dried lemons and the smell of tar and the clatter of boarding planks, the raw throat of a gull, the sarcastic laughter of men who had lived too long in the sun. Serena ignored it as one ignores the weather. She led across planks that bucked like green animals and onto a ship that was not like other ships. The hull was black, not the glossy black of tar, not the warm black of oiled wood. It was a black that seemed an answer to questions she had not yet thought to ask. Lines ran along it, not carving so much as suggestion, like the memory of ribs beneath a shirt. The prow had a horn like the horn Serena had shown them, only this one was not cut down. It curled and curved and held itself with the quiet confidence of something that knew its own weight. "Is it bone?" Daenerys asked before she remembered to pretend she did not marvel. "It is what bone becomes when it has lain near flame for long enough," Serena said. "Bone that remembers heat. We have learned how to ask it to remember more." The sails were a deep red that drank the rising sun. The crew moved with the coordination of men who believed they would live if they did what they had been trained to do and die if they did not. Daenerys counted only 15. Illyrio, who had the habit of counting twice and aloud, sighed when he reached the same number and said, "Such small crews, such swift ships. I do not suppose you would let me buy one." Serena glanced at him as one glances at a merchant who has asked to buy a mountain. "No," she said. Viserys had come down to the dock after all, hair unbound and face tight. He had not come to wish her well. He had come because he could not stand to not see what he was losing the ability to shout at. He stood on the planks and said her name once, Daenerys, and in that gift of the full name instead of the contemptuous sister he had used F. Or years was something that might have been apology if you turned it in the light. She held to the rail and looked down at him and understood that he thought he was looking up at a tower that had been built without him and that he was doing the dangerous child's thing, looking for a ledge he could cut to make it fall onto the people inside. He had always been more dangerous to those inside than to the men outside the walls. "Come with us," she said before sense could gag her. She saw the men on the dock turn their heads. Even the man selling lemons paused mid-cry. If the freehold has law, you can ask their teeth to take your quarrel. If the freehold has memory, you can ask them to remember who we were. He stepped backward as if she had lifted a hand, and then forward as if he had remembered anger was cheaper. "Do you think I would beg?" he asked, and she saw the tightness around his eyes that meant he was about to say something that would make them both ashamed. "Do you think I would ask minors to adjudicate kingship? I think you would be less alone," she said, and his face went carefully blank. He did not like to be seen in his mistaken angle. "I will have my army," he said. "Do you hear? I will have my call. You will crawl back to Pentos when they are done with you, when they have trimmed your hair to the ash braid and given you a scar like that woman's and reminded you of what little is left to you. If you come back at all, I will be patient. I am a patient king." Daenerys looked at Serena and at the horn-tipped prow and at the water that had become, in that minute, a thing that could be crossed. She looked at Viserys and thought how patience in him was always a word he used when he meant there was nothing he could do yet. "Goodbye," she said softly. He made a choking sound and laughed because the other sound would have undone him. She did not watch him and Illyrio walk away from the dock. She looked out to sea, and when the ship slipped its ties and obeyed the wind, she held the rail and did not release it. The city fell behind them like a dropped coin, diminishing until it was less than a thumb's width and then less than a thumbnail and then a smudge. The sea made its noise. Serena vanished into the stern's shade to speak with her men and stare at maps Daenerys could not see. The boy with the black glass case appeared at her elbow and said in a voice that tried to be unremarkable and failed, "Would you like a drink? The water tastes of the bone. You will learn to like it." "Your name?" she asked, because he had been around her like a shadow that had never been introduced. "Varro," he said quickly. He was perhaps 12. He wore no horn. He wore a thin strip of leather around his wrist with a knot that had been retied too many times. He held a cup of something that was indeed water but not water, the sense of something living in it, not fish or plant, but something that had memory. She drank. It was clean and strange, and it seemed to glance off her teeth before it consented to slide into her. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Oris," he said, pride like a small fire in the word. "I was born in a room that overlooks the Tremor Plains. In winter we can see the steam. In summer the air seems to sing when the ground sighs." He swallowed. "I have not seen winter from the city. They sent me with Serena in the autumn. It is better not to see winter if you are only going to leave it." "Who cut your scar?" she asked, surprising herself. Serena said hers was an oath. "Was yours?" He touched the crescent near his eye and then dropped his hand as if he had broken a rule. "A game," he said shortly, and then because something in her face asked gently for more, he added, "We run the stair when we are very small. There is a stair that goes to a platform where the fighters stand. The fighters are older, and so we mimic them, and we press our faces against the glass where the pits let the heat walk through. Once I was too eager. I touched it. Serena told me I had taken the heat's promise too soon." He looked out at the horizon as if the word horizon had been promised to him and given to someone else. "It will be good to see home. We are going to yours," she said, "and perhaps to mine." And the thought made her dizzy, as if the deck had tipped beneath her feet, though it had not. For days the ship moved like a knife through silk. The sea changed color as a woman changes mood. The sky made its own inventions. The crew spoke more with hands than with mouths. Serena permitted Daenerys to stand at the bow so long as she wore a heavy belt strapped to a ring and did not lean like a fool. When Daenerys asked if the ring was to keep curious girls from making new gods in the water, Serena's mouth flickered for a part of a breath that might have been the ghost of a smile. Daenerys learned how the black-bone ship hummed when the wind shifted and how to read the line of Serena's shoulders as easily as she had once learned to read Viserys' temper by his tone. She dreamed, too. She dreamed of stairways ascending through rock and of rooms shaped like throats. She dreamed of a gallery where the walls were lined with candles the color of obsidian, each one lit, each one singing in a tone too low to be heard. She woke with salt in her mouth and could not tell if it had come from the sea or from tears. On the 7th morning, the sea was not like itself. The water lay glass-flat for an hour and then uncreased itself into a new thing. Beds of something that looked like pumice, but when the ship passed over them, the hull made a different note and the skin on her forearms tightened as if a cold wind had blown though no wind had. Varro pointed with his whole hand and did not speak. Serena spoke without looking back. "The first shoals," she said. "We will not heave to. We will thread." "What is the thread?" Daenerys asked. "The old line," Serena said. "The line we taught to our ships when the old law said we might." One of the silent men laughed softly at something he found in the water. She glanced, saw only the way the sea's blue had become a green that drank fists of sunlight. "There will be markers. You will not see them unless I tell you which part of the sky to look at." "You taught the sea how to let you pass," Daenerys said, and did not mean flattery. "We taught ourselves how to behave so that the sea would let us," Serena corrected. "This is different." The smell changed. It was not unpleasant. She had smelled unpleasant smoke and knew it. Launderers in alleys and soldiers' cook fires and the sometimes burning of garbage when the wind was wrong. This was earth made visible. It was stone in vapor. It was the flavor of heat without the heat itself. It reminded her of the one afternoon at Dragonstone when she had fallen asleep beneath a window and the sunlight had sneaked its arms around her and she had woken to her mother's laugh. The memory was so sharp she pressed a hand against the rail, afraid her skin would keep the indent of it. She saw the first of the flames at noon. She had expected a wall of mountain or a neat string of cones with red hats. The 14 were less orderly. They rose like a choir that had never learned the same song. Some were low and wide. Some were tall and mean. One was embarrassed and tried to hide behind a cusp of cloud. Two leaned toward each other like sisters whispering gossip. They were not all aflame. 3 smoked. One bled a river of rock that had turned to glass halfway to the sea and made a black tongue licked by waves. Above another, a thin plume rose and frayed and made the sky look as if a huge hand had pulled lace across it. Between them lay the city. Daenerys had painted cities in her head because Viserys had dragged her from one to another like a bad fisherman dragging his net. She knew the rafters and the seams and the doors at the backs of taverns. She had seen palaces built to look like ships and palaces built to look like mountains and palaces that did not look like anything except a rich man's fear of emptiness. The city between the 14 had none of the show-off bravado of those places and all of something else that made it hard to look away. It had been built for heat. It had been built with the knowledge of heat. Its roads were less roads than veins. Dark ribbons that gleamed even at this distance, bringing warmth where warmth was needed and stealing it where it would have been too much. Bridges slid across deep cracks where steam rose like ghosts. White walls were placed to catch a particular wind. Towers were narrow in places and widened in gallery shelves where the air must be cooler. Courtyards were latticed to hold shade the way a net holds fish. Light moved over everything like an animal that had been trained. And in the spaces where men would have built temples if they had needed to beg, Daenerys saw low structures with roofs like the bellies of whales, and the roofs breathed. Orys, Serena said, but she did not need to. The word had come into Daenerys' mouth as if it had known the way all along. Orys. The word meant nothing, and it meant standing on the deck of a black-bone ship with her hair in her eyes and her hands cold around a rail while the 14 watched the harbor like unamused grandmothers. They did not go to a harbor. Orys did not have a harbor like the cities Daenerys knew. It had piers, yes, long reaches of stone that curved like fingers. Between 2 of the fingers the water was the color of wine, and it moved in a way that made the crew breathe together. The ship slid and stopped and did not bump anything she could see. Lines were thrown and caught in an old pattern, and the lines had hooks on them carved from the same not-quite bone that the prow had been made from. She felt the deck settle as if the ship had sighed. "What will they do to me?" she heard herself ask. And only after she asked it did she know she had asked a thing she had been crafting since Pentos. Serena's eyes were on the piers and on the men who had come to stand at their ends. Figures in garments that made the shapes of their bodies look like weapons had been considered. "They will speak your name," she said. "You will speak it back." "And then," Daenerys said, because the word was necessary. "And then," Serena said, "they will cut you." She turned from the piers and their waiting men to face Daenerys. As one faces a cliff, you must ask to bear your weight. The horn cut. Here. She traced a line below her own jaw with a finger that bore no ring. "It is shallow. It will not be as mine was. There has been time since I was a child. The oaths are less severe now because the need is less, or because the law has learned mercy." She shrugged. One shoulder, a small mountain. "They will test your blood and your heat and your fear, and then they will ask you to stand with your mouth open while they speak a name into you and see if it stays. And if it does not?" Daenerys asked, and was ashamed of how small her voice had gotten. "Then you will be honored," Serena said simply, and did not add the easy lie. She went ashore under a sky that appeared exactly as it had an hour before, but which could not have been, because the ground beneath it had tilted her inside without asking permission. The men on the piers fell into two ranks as Serena led them through. They did not bow. Daenerys felt the absence like cool water on a burn. She had been bowed to, and she had been sneered at, and she had been ignored. This was something else. The men stood and watched and did not ask her to be smaller. She did not cry. They took the wide, dark vein roads into the city. The heat lay over everything like a shawl. It was not the murderous heat of some cities in high summer, heat like a bad man's hand. This was heat with history, heat that understood it could be useful. Children crossed a courtyard, and one of them dragged a stick along a lattice of a fence, and the sound was like a stringed instrument being tuned. A woman swept a step. Steam rose from a crack, and a man stuck his hand into it and drew it out again and grinned as if he had shaken hands with an old friend. Somewhere a choir sang. Not of gods, Daenerys thought, but of the work of the day. Varro kept at her left shoulder as if she were the thing he had been sent to keep alive, not his own fragile youth. Serena walked 2 paces ahead, and the men who had been waiting fell in behind them like a tail. The 14 were everywhere and nowhere. When she looked up, she saw them, and when she kept her eyes on the road, she felt them in her bones. The heat braided itself into her hair and made it feel heavier. The black ribbon around Serena's neck held the knot horn, and Daenerys found herself matching her breath to the sway of it. They brought her to a building that did not assert itself the way a palace would have. It sat with its doors wide, and the air inside was the cool of a shaded stream. Pillars held up a roof studded with plates of metal shaped like leaves that fluttered even without wind, each moving a fraction of an inch at a time in a sequence that must have been thought through by someone who wanted to become invisible. In the door stood a woman with iron eyes. Daenerys knew her at once. She had known her in a room in Pentos when a candle that had never been a candle lit without fire. The woman did not speak. She lifted a hand in a gesture that might have meant welcome or command. Her hair was dark and braided differently than Serena's, and it had more gray in it than the face had allowed in Daenerys's dream. She wore a garment that looked softer than the men's, but that held its shape as if shape were a thing one could own. Around her wrists were banded scars, thin and even, as if bracelets had been cut into her and then removed. Serena inclined her head. Daenerys understood that what Serena did was not a bow but a recognition. "Keeper," she said. The woman's mouth tilted a little and then corrected itself. "Serena," she said, and then without a beat of ceremony, her gaze struck Daenerys like a hammer striking iron. "You brought her." "She brought herself," Serena said, and Daenerys did not look away as she might have on another day when men were speaking about her to each other as if she were a bowl they were about to place on a table. The keeper of the candles stepped close enough that Daenerys saw the fine sweat at her temple and the way her pupils narrowed the way cats do when the light is precise. She lifted her hand and did not touch Daenerys's face. The gesture had been meant to carry weight without contact. "You are the last," she said, which is not the same as saying you are the least. "Come," I remember your mother's laugh. I remember her once talking to a glass about the gray of the dawn and not about kings. You have her mouth." She turned and led them into the candle hall. It was a long room and a small one at once. It held more candles than Daenerys' eyes could count, and each one was a slender column of black that gave off light like heat gives off the idea of itself. The light was not like anything she had known. She could see it, and yet it seemed to arrive inside her eyes at once rather than travel through the air to reach them. The candles hummed a little, not in her ears, in her teeth. Keepers and acolytes moved among them. Daenerys wanted, absurdly, to lift a hair off her own shoulder and lay it on one of the candles and see if the hair would sing. She kept her hands at her sides. "Your blood," the keeper said simply, and the word did not mean to embarrass. She turned to one of the acolytes, a woman barely older than Daenerys, and nodded, and the woman came with a blade that had been polished so many times it had given up being a blade and was merely a willingness to cut. Daenerys did not flinch when her finger was nicked and a single bead of blood surfaced, as if the blood had been waiting for this and had come willingly. The woman caught it on the tip of a narrow glass rod and carried it like a pearl to one of the candles. She laid the blood against the black. The black swallowed the red. The candle's hum deepened and shifted. The keeper's eyes half closed. The room held its breath. "Good," she said quietly. "Good." She stepped back, and in the motion it made, the now found its place on top of the before and the after. "We will break your fear now. Better now than later. Turn your head." The blade that made the horn cut was a different blade. It was curved to match the curve of throats. Serena stood at Daenerys' shoulder, and her breath counted with Daenerys's. Varro was outside the circle men had made of their bodies to keep the ceremony from curious others, and Daenerys saw him on the edges of her sight, eyes round. The blade came, and it was not pain like any of the pains she had known. A scraped knee, a palm blistered by a too-heavy bucket, the way it aches when you are not wanted. It was as if someone had taken a small, precise piece of heat and laid it on her skin and asked it to teach. She did not cry out. She breathed. She smelled the old smell of stone and the newer smell of her own blood. Not much, just enough to remind her that a body is a thing. The keeper pressed her thumb lightly below the cut and lifted it, and Daenerys felt the shape of it already healing. "Your fear will now be given another shape to inhabit, so that it will be very busy and you will have time to choose things," the keeper said. "This is the law's small kindness." "What belongs to me?" Daenerys asked again, because the presence of candles makes some words urgently stupid. "A name," the keeper said, "that does not belong to anyone else and that we prefer you not to say yet. Not until it has learned you." They gave her a room that opened onto a courtyard where steam drifted and dragons could have perched if they had been tame. And that thought was strange because she had spent her whole life thinking of dragons as dead, and here it seemed obvious that if dragons were near heat they might be less dead. She sat on the edge of the bed and felt the bandage below her throat. She thought of all the names she had been given that were not the one the keeper meant. Sister and girl and child and your grace and 100 variants of slut or prize depending on who was saying it. She thought of the name she had been born with and how it had been a flag for other people to wave. She thought for a long time about what it would be to carry a name that wanted her and not the men around her. A knock at the lattice brought her out of the thinking place. Varro stood with a tray of broth, and behind him a woman with hair the color of smoke and a jaw that had decided not to be delicate. "I am Maegla of the Veins," the woman said. "I am told to watch your heat while you learn to walk in it without falling." "What is it to walk in heat?" Daenerys asked, and Maegla smiled as if she had been waiting for that question all day. "It is to live here," she said. "It is to recognize where the currents walk beneath the stone. It is to not sleep where the singing is loud. It is to know which air is simply air and which is the yawning mouth of the old fire. Men who do not learn it die. Women who do not learn it faint and are taken from rooms as if they had been beautiful corpses. We prefer our women to remain standing. If you are to be what they say you will be, something heir to something, you will have to be one of the standing ones." The broth was full of small white fish and strips of a vegetable that tasted like the ghost of a mountain's breath. Maegla watched her drink. When Daenerys lowered the cup, Megla touched the bandage at her throat with quick fingers and nodded to herself as if she had been testing a knot. "It sits well on your skin," she said. "Some skins hate the law and swell like bad fruit. Yours has agreed." Days in Oris were made of lessons that did not call themselves lessons. A girl with the quick hands of a thief taught her how to press her palm to the stone in the morning and hear if the day meant to be agitated. An old man with beard like a waterfall of thread taught her where to walk when the tremor plains sang, on the white lines, not the dark, because the white had been placed where the heat was carried away. A keeper's acolyte showed her the way the candles changed song when someone with a certain kind of blood stood near them. And Daenerys realized one afternoon with a jolt that the candles sang differently for her each day, a harmony growing around a note she had not yet heard. She saw dragons. Should have undone her. Did not. They were not the fantastical ends of stories here. They were animals with a history. The first she saw flew low across a field where something grew that liked heat. The dragon's shadow moved over the field and the plants lifted their faces as if blessed. The dragon's wings made a sound like a sheet made of ribs being shaken. Its color was not one thing. It had the black of a shut eye and the red of coals and the gray of tongue ash and something else that the Orosi simply called heat's memory and shrugged. Its head did not turn toward her. Its tail did not whip men from their saddles in glorious deaths. It flew and disappeared behind a tower, and the tower did not catch fire. She did not cry. The second she saw was sleeping on a lip of stone above a vent. The vent's steam rose and broke around the dragon's belly like lace. Two men stood 12 paces from it and spoke in low voices. One pointed at the dragon's left wing as if discussing a pulley. The dragon opened one eye and revealed the slow intelligence inside it, an old patience that had been trained to remain even in the face of men with measurements. The men finished their measuring and left. The dragon stayed asleep. In the afternoon, the dragon lifted, stretched, and wing-shadowed a long wall where children played a game with glass rings. They shrieked with joy and leapt for the shadow to claim it for a father or a mother. "Not all dragons belong to houses," Serena said when Daenerys asked. "Like cats. Some find a person and keep them. Some find a place. You will see the ones that belong. They are the ones with bells on them." "Bells?" Daenerys said, surprised into laughter. And Serena actually smiled, a broad showing of teeth that made her look momentarily like a young and dangerous cousin of herself. "Not of metal," she said. "Of horn. A cut of horn shaped like a bell. It sings very quietly, and we hear it when we attend to them. It is how we count their breaths." "Listen," Daenerys said to herself in the bed that did not move. "Listen to everything. Do not become so enamored of the shape of words that you forget the shape of heat. Do not forget the sentence that came with the candle. You are a place where a thing can happen." On the 9th morning, they led her to a chamber that was not a chamber, a room built in the open. Its roof the careful arc of a canopy of tiles that were spaced to let the steam go where it wanted without trapping the air. The floor was a mosaic, black and white and red, arranged in a pattern that did not look like anything until she stood at its center, and then it looked like a map of currents. Serena was there. The keeper was there. For men and 3 women she had glimpsed in passageways where law was made were there. Varro was not. Megla of the Veins was. "This is where we say what we have learned," the keeper said, and her voice had carried over rock and smoke for decades, carried now. "This is where we ask the old things to move aside a little." "Why?" Daenerys asked, unable to help herself. "Why ask them? Why not force them?" "Because the old things are what we will become if we are not careful," the keeper said. "Because it is unwise to make enemies of your own bones." They did not place a crown on her. They did not place a ring. They placed 3 stones on the mosaic, one white and one red and one the color of shut eyes. They were eggs. She knew them without knowing how, eggs the shape of stories, the weight of memory. She had seen something like them once, in Illyrio's manse. 3 dead things meant to adorn a mantle. These were not dead. She did not need to touch them to know. They were asleep and dreaming. "What is this?" she whispered. And the whisper came back from the tiles below her feet as if the mosaic knew how to mimic. "A proof," Serena said. "And a question. Whose eggs?" Daenerys asked, though the question was ridiculous. Eggs belonged to themselves until they were asked to belong to someone else, and even then they were recalcitrant. They have belonged, said Maegla of the Veins, to heat, and then to stone, and then to neglect, and then to us. They will decide. Daenerys took one step forward on the pattern of currents, and the air changed. It was as if she had stepped from a room where a candle burned into a room where someone had opened the window, only the window opened onto a place beneath a mountain. Her throat felt the cut as a new thing full of meaning. The bandage shifted like a soft verdict. She looked at the white egg. Its surface was scaled like fish or armor. The smell was the smell of clean dust. The red egg had a web of lines like the first men had carved into standing stones in the old tales. The black egg had no lines at all. It held light and did not give it back. She reached a hand toward it, and the old fear rose the way a dog rises when it thinks it has been called. She let it approach and let it sit and did not let it dictate. Her hand did not shake. Names, the keeper said, the one word like a bell. Daenerys did not summon the names she had carried like charms on a poor chain. She did not call the names of dead queens or of men who had never liked her. She had a memory of a hot day at Dragonstone, of 3 notes of a song, of the quiet hinge of her mother's mouth when she had been about to speak and then had changed her mind and smiled instead. She had a memory of being small enough to fit on a lap and of the way laughter feels when it echoes on your ribs from inside. "I have a name," she whispered, and the whisper had strength the way string has strength when it has been twined with other strings. "It is mine. I will not say it yet." She looked at the keeper and saw, in that iron face, iron softened for once. "I will let it say me." "Good," the keeper said, almost to herself. The heat rose in the chamber like a pleased animal. Maegla came to stand opposite Daenerys and placed her hands out, palms up, an invitation of sorts. Serena lifted her scarred chin for the first time as if offering it and all it had meant for inspection. The women and men of the law did not bow, and the absence of bowing was again a mercy. There was a small formal speech spoken in Old Valyrian that felt like sturdy furniture, the kind that remains useful long after fashions have passed. Daenerys did not understand every word. She understood the shape of it, breath and memory, fire and mouth. She laid her palm on the black egg. The heat that met her was not of this room or of the air. It was of the thing inside. It did not burn her, pressed. It placed itself against her palm and asked a delicate, serious question. She thought it a question about the kind of fire she was. She thought it might be a question about whether she was a flame that devours or a flame that makes a room livable. She did not answer with words. She did not know any that would have meant what needed to be meant. She let the new name, the one she had gathered and kept, rise behind her cut throat like a small star, and she let it not be spoken. The egg moved, not visibly, not in a way that would have scandalized a witness who needed drama. It moved the way that the sea had moved on the 7th morning, one long low uncreasing. The surface under her palm warmed and cooled and warmed again. A breath. Daenerys felt the breath count itself against her own and then fall into sync. The mosaic below her shivered as if heat had found a new route to take and tried it with cautious joy. She heard, behind her teeth, a new note join the candle's hum, an octave down, a cousin. "Enough," said the keeper softly, before joy could become triumph. Too much of anything in Orys had a way of turning into its opposite. "You will come again. You will feed the law and let the law feed you." Today the mouth and the fire have agreed to stop gnawing at each other and to consider living side by side. Serena's breath left her then as if she had been waiting to get permission to exhale. She rubbed her fingers along the horn pendant, and Daenerys saw the moment when a new calculation started in the older woman's eyes. You could not spend your whole life keeping a city safe inside its heat without thinking about what would be required of the day after. That night Daenerys lay in the cool of her room and watched the white breath of steam drift like a veil across the courtyard and thought about letters and glass and law and dragons sleeping above vents. She thought of the bones of a city that had chosen not to die when places like Pentos and Myr and Lys had sworn it dead. She thought of her brother and of his tempestuous, starving face, and she had to place that thought carefully on the shelf where pity and fear argued about whose job it was to hold onto it. There would be more days. The eggs would be visited again. The law would ask for breath and for memory and for the two to be held together, and Daenerys would be asked to carry a name inside her mouth like a small living animal. She would be asked to say it eventually, in front of the only men and women in the world who would truly hear it. She would be asked to decide what happens when a name and a city recognize each other, when sleep final. Why came to fetch her? She let it lead her through a corridor lined with candles that had never been candles. Somewhere deep under Orys, a dragon shifted its weight on stone. Somewhere deep in her a word she had not yet spoken rolled onto one side and settled in a position of rest. Morning found her on a balcony where a keeper's acolyte was making tea by setting a small kettle atop a lattice of brick beneath which a vein of the city's warmth had been coaxed to pass. The sea beyond the city was a day's pale blue, and the 14 seemed briefly affectionate instead of austere. A bird perched on the balcony rail, brown and unremarkable and not a dove, and regarded her as if she were an ordinary thing at last, someone to be noted and then ignored. Serena appeared without ceremony. She had the look of a messenger who had learned patience in a hard school. "The Senate will ask you to attend," she said. "Not today. They will allow the cut to heal. They will wish to pretend mercy as well as practice it. But soon, they will want to tell you a story." "Whose?" Daenerys asked. "Theirs," Serena said. "Yours." "Ours." "A story that begins in a house that was not meant to be yours and ends in a city that does not know how to end." She came to stand beside Daenerys at the rail and watched the bird watch them. "Your brother will come. He hates to be left," Daenerys said. "He hates what he cannot claim," Serena said. "Sometimes these are the same thing. Sometimes they are not. The law will give him a place to stand. He will either stand in it or gnaw its edge and bloody his mouth. Either way, the mouth must exhaust itself." Daenerys did not ask what would be done with his exhaustion. She did not want to begin the day with a question that heavy. Instead, she lifted the cup and let the tea scald the tip of her tongue and thought. Mouth and heat, breath and memory. She had never been good at waiting when waiting meant nothing. Here, waiting meant something. It was something that could be practiced. It was something like a muscle being taught how to do work. She took from the chest the small brooch with cheap stones that had once been a proof and now was only a kept thing. She turned it in her hand. She did not know whether her mother would have wanted this for her child or whether dragons and laws had been sorrows the woman had hoped to bury in a foreign stone. The thought did not sting as much as it might have. Her throat ached pleasantly where the horn cut lay like a thin second smile. The days came like firm beads on a string. She ate fruit that had ripened in the heat of a dragon's shadow and tasted faintly of coal. She stepped over thin channels where water moved through the city as if the city cried continuously and kept its tears. She learned the names of the keepers who could stand for hours in the candle hall without shaking and the names of the men who dropped to a bench after one circuit and laughed at themselves. She heard once a long, low horn blown somewhere in the city that made her skin pucker and asked Serena what it was. And Serena said in the same steady voice as always, "Something large deciding not to wake up yet." Then came the Senate. The Senate met in a room that was shaped like a listening ear, one perfect echo sending a single voice into all corners. The senators did not dress like kings, but their garments had been made by people who understood how cloth can hold authority. There was no dais. There were tiers. Men and women sat by houses but also by work, and Daenerys felt a little as if the city had brought its tools and arranged them on a table. The keepers sat together, the measurers together, the horns together. A place had been left for Serena's people and for Daenerys, and the place felt deliberately unobtrusive and impossible to miss. The Archon of Orys wore his hair long and his patience longer. The voice that began the story was not his. It was a woman's voice, older than the keepers, and it belonged to a senator whose hands had been burned long ago and healed badly, and who wore them without shame. She spoke of Enar and of the old quarrels that had sent a branch of the blood west before the peninsula learned the utility of secrecy. She spoke of the way promises had been made to those who carried the language over water, and how those promises had been broken and mended and broken again depending on which generation of men needed to think better of itself. She spoke of a name that had once been spoken in this room and then forbade by this room because to speak it had become too dangerous. She spoke of how the candles remembered voices even when men pretended to forget. She spoke of children and oaths and the way the old law had learned the necessity of mercy and the way mercy had slowly taught law how to not be a blunt instrument. Then she said Daenerys's name, the old forms, the old music, the lilt that had not been used in all the years of Viserys flailing because no one had thought to sing her this way. Daenerys did not cry, though the skin under her eyes went hot. "You are the last of what your line can make," the senator said without ornament. "You are not the last of what your line will hold open. The distinction is important. Tell us if you mean to be a mouth that takes or a mouth that gives. Tell us if you are a fire that makes rooms impossible to live in or one that allows men to cook and children to be warm." "I will be a mouth that speaks what it is given," Daenerys said slowly. "I will not pretend to be more than that. I will hold a room open for whatever will come through it. And I will be a flame that lights in that." She stopped, aware of the words spinning out ahead of her like an unspooled thread. "That refuses to be used to burn people who are tired of running." There was no applause. The Senate was a place that preferred to log things rather than to celebrate them. The Archon's long hair did not move. In the topmost tier, a boy with a SC. Near his eye leaned forward as if the words had been a ball he might one day chase. After, in a smaller room where heat was fed through reed curtains so that the air moved like the breath of a sleeping animal, the keeper stood with Daenerys and Serena and Maegla, and the four of them felt, for the length of one breath, like a table with legs that matched. "They will test you with work," the keeper said in a tone that turned warning into information. "They will ask you to listen to things you are not old enough to understand. They will love you twice for each time they try to use you. They will tell you stories that have been boiled down to syrup and expect you to feed others with them. You will need to bring them water and ask them to remember the tree." "Will they tell me which name you meant for me to learn?" Daenerys asked. The wound at her throat had stopped being a wound. It had become punctuation. "No," the keeper said. "You will carry it until it presses your tongue from within and causes you to speak. You will know it when that happens because it will be less a speaking than a surrender. Do not make of it something theatrical." Serena had been quiet, which meant a storm of thought. Now she said softly, "Your brother has docked." Daenerys exhaled as if she had been holding that much air for many years. "The law will give him a place to stand," she said, repeating Serena's earlier sentence not as a mantra but as the only angle from which the situation did not immediately collapse under its own weight. "It will," Serena said. "We will see if he prefers to saw at its edges. If he does, we will give him something sturdier to wear his teeth on. This is a mercy we learned slowly." Viserys came into Orys with his hair bound and his eyes alight and the swagger of someone who has finally found the stage large enough for his gesture. He was not given a stage. He was given an office with a window that looked out on a courtyard where children played with glass rings and where the shadow of a dragon passed at irregular intervals like a clock that kept a different sort of time. He shouted first because shouting had always been his way of measuring a room. When the room did not change size, he practiced silence. In the silence, men and women told him the story he had always wanted to hear, of wrongs and of teeth and of law that would be on his side if he could say his claim without demanding blood. He tried. For days he tried. Daenerys watched him from the corner of her eye and felt both love and the relief of not having to be where he was. Evenings she returned to the chamber of the mosaic and laid her hands on the eggs and heard their breath and did not hurry them. The red liked the sound of her mother's 3 notes. The white liked the feel of her palm when she had just washed it in cold water. The black liked nothing and everything, was exacting and then too generous, was old and newly born, was intractable and the easiest of the 3. Maegla watched her once with a look that held professional curiosity and a softness Maegla had perhaps not let many people see. "You will have to ask yourself if the room you are opening has walls," she said. "And if it doesn't, whether you can live inside it anyway." "What if I cannot?" Daenerys asked, and knew it was a luxury to ask. "Then you will decide where to build a wall," Megla said. "And you will be blamed for it, and you will accept the blame because it is the price you pay for the wall keeping people from falling off the floor of the world." On a morning that was like most mornings here, steam, precise light, the hum of candles in the bones, Daenerys returned to the mosaic room and found the keeper waiting alone, hands empty. "Noix, no senators, no siraena, no maegla, no varro." Just the woman with iron eyes and the scars around her wrists and the look of someone who is prepared to hold a room open at her own expense. "Today you will walk without help," the keeper said. "Today you will go from this room to the place beneath the house of coal, where the deep breath pushes and we ask it to go down and not up. There is a stair. You will walk it. If your knees shake, you will laugh at how alive you are and keep walking. Serena has done this. Megla has done this. I did it when I was younger than you and less loved. You will do it now. When you reach the platform, you will touch the old stone and you will listen for your name. If you hear it, you will not say it aloud. Sometimes what is spoken too quickly burns the mouth." "How will I know which of the many names is the one?" Daenerys asked. "How will I know it is not just my wish?" "You will know," the keeper said, "because it will sit down in you and refuse to be moved by argument. It will be the opposite of Viserys." Daenerys laughed in spite of herself and did not weep when she did so. She stepped onto the stair. The stair was old. It had been built by the men and women whose grandchildren had been the ones who taught the law to have mercy. It spiraled through stone in a way that made the stone's age a companion rather than an obstacle. The air grew warmer as she went. Not intolerably, not in a way that made her vision splotch. She placed her palm against the wall more than once and felt the hum of the city's arranged heat pass beneath her hand like the back of a domestic beast. The hum changed as she went into something the city had not arranged. A deeper note, too long been playing. At the first platform she paused and counted to 50 and then to 50 again. At the second she drank from a small skin tied to her belt and did not guzzle. At the third she laughed at how her knees pinged with life. At the fourth there was no platform, only a widening of the stair that revealed the place beneath the house of coal, a room like a lung. The stone had been blackened and then soothed, blackened and then soothed, for 1,000 years. The floor was a lattice of slab and void Aaron, ged to let the old breath wander and not be trapped. The heat here was not the loudest heat in Oris. It was the most sincere. She knelt without being told and placed her hands on the old stone. The name did not speak. It did not rise like steam or descend like judgment. It shifted in her like a creature that had been sleeping beside her for years and had finally decided to place its head in her lap. She closed her hands and felt, not the weight of it, but the rightness of it being where it was. She did not say it. Her mouth knew not to. Instead she said, into the old stone's hum, "I hear you," which was the truth and the limit of the truth for that moment. When she returned, Serena was in the courtyard. Her face did not usually betray relief. Now it did, and Daenerys thought, "I must get used to being loved by people who would cut their own throats for a city. It is a different sort of love than the storybooks made, but it is solid." "Did you hear it?" Serena asked. "Yes," Daenerys said. "Good," Serena said. "Do not say it. Make it work for a time. Names with work to do are better behaved than names that are simply ornaments." Viserys sent a message. He sent it through a boy who wore the sign of the law around his neck and did not know how to be intimidated by princes. He asked for Daenerys to come to his office with the window that looked over the dragon-shadowed courtyard. She went. He had discovered that a chair placed at a precise angle to the light could make him look taller. He spoke to her about an audience with the Senate that had not gone as he wished and of the way the keeper had watched him, as if he were a picture drawn by a child that an aunt admired while secretly wondering if the child was a wolf. He asked her to speak for him. He asked her to remember that he was the last of their line. "No," she said gently, firmly. The horn cut on her throat did not ache. "You are not the last. I am here. You are a girl," he said, falling into his old habits like a drunk into a familiar ditch. "I am a mouth," she said, and saw him blink, because he did not know what to do with a woman who did not offer him metaphors he could mount. He stood then, knocking a board game off the table with his hip, small glass pieces tumbling like coins. "You will regret this," he said, and the sentence was one of those old coins he kept pressing even though no one accepted it in any market. "You will crawl to me when the heat has burned you hollow, and the law has cut your throat in bigger bites, and those candles have drunk your eyes' ability to see anything but themselves." She thought of telling him about the stare and the name on her lap and the way it had refused to be moved by argument. She thought of telling him about the dragon's shadow making children reach out their hands and how no one had died in the process. She did not tell him. "I hope the law leaves you something to stand on," she said instead, "because mercy was a habit you had to practice too. I hope you stand on it." There were other days. There were days when the eggs were quiet and Daenerys learned patience and how to tie her hair so that it did not trap heat against her neck. There were days when pains came for women she did not know, the flesh pains and the grief pains, and she watched the way Orys made of mercy a practical skill instead of a poem and realized she had been starved for this sort of competence. There were days when the Senate did what it always did. Made a law, sanded its edge, tried it against reality, sanded again. There were days when Maegla took her to the Tremor Plains and they stood on a ridge and felt the ground breathe. Maegla told her of a time when one of the flames had coughed up rocks in the shapes of the animals that had once walked here before the sea learned to be sea, and the thought made Daenerys dizzy with scale. There were nights when the candle lit itself in her room and showed her faces of men and women speaking in cities she had known and in others she had not, and she learned, because the Keeper told her she must, how to listen without letting the listening slide into voyeurism. "It is a crime to take from a voice what it does not know it is giving," the Keeper said. "You may only hear what the law would hear. If you hear more, forget it." There were moments when the thought of Westeros crept up on her like a cat that had learned how to open doors. She still had that thought sometimes. A throne made of swords that had once been carried by men who grabbed and pushed. She had the thought of halls that had lost their queens one by one and were full of men who liked to call themselves clever. She had the thought of a boy king who had not earned a name and a man who had grown fat on the invention of politics and a woman who had discovered the utility of grief. She did not let these thoughts consume her, not because they were not important but because the city that had taken her in asked her to make her mouth useful in the present. Law fed on what was at hand, and there was a day when, in the mosaic room, the black egg breathed and then did not settle, tilted in its own reality. It pressed its recognition against her palm and then, for one long breath, it asked to be named. Daenerys closed her eyes and felt the old mouth gather in her throat. Her tongue rose. The name came into her mouth not like a guest but like a child returning from a long errand. A child with dust on its feet and the right to open the door without knocking. She could have said it. She did not. The Keeper had told her not to be theatrical, and she had no desire to burn her own tongue. She lowered her head and whispered instead, "Not yet," which was a vow and a promise and a mercy. The egg's heat agreed. The air in Orys moved over her skin and made a small sound like the beginning of a song. Somewhere beyond the city, on a road that had teeth and that sometimes decided to bite, a man who had come believing him. A king swore at a wheel and told himself the law was a game he was learning to win. In the candle hall, a light flickered in a pattern the Keeper had been waiting to see. Serena, asleep in a chair because she had worked through the night to settle a quarrel between two men who both believed the same land had been promised to them by the same grandmother, woke with a gasp and knew she had missed a moment she had wanted to witness. Maegla of the Veins stifled a laugh in a corridor because life continued to make her love it. Varro, on a stair, stopped and pressed his fingers to the wall and felt the gentle, impossible hum grow a breath deeper, like an old animal pleased with a new arrangement of its bed. Daenerys Targaryen stood with her hand on the egg that had met her and had not burned her and listened to the city learn her. She breathed and held her memory in place. She knew she was a mouth and a hand. She knew she had not been asked for a very long time to be anything so simple. There was time yet to name. There was time yet to speak. There was time yet for the city and the woman and the old law and the young heat to see if they could live with each other without anyone being burned more than necessary. There were stairs to climb and courtyards to cross and men who would need to be told that a throne is something like a kiln, useful only when you know what you are trying to make. There were dragons that would wake like winter bearers and stretch their wings into rooms where children played with glass rings. There was a peninsula that had worn secrecy like a cloak and had now lifted the edge long enough to invite a girl inside. That night, Daenerys lay again with her hands open and did not try to sleep. At some point, sleep came anyway and brought her no visions. Quiet was a gift. In the morning, when the first steam practiced itself through the lattice like always, she rose and bound her hair in an ash braid because she had earned it. She touched the bandage below her throat and found the skin had knitted cleanly, the line like a promise done in good handwriting. She drank tea, and the cup warmed her hands, and the heat moved through her in patient lines. Serena appeared and did not ask anything because not everything needed to be asked. They stood a moment, sharing the sort of silence that might still be present even when two people are far apart and thinking of each other. Then the day opened. She walked into it,